Yeah, so what brought me to talk on grace and to see it kind of from that particular angle, I, I wanted to talk on grace, and then just in talking on it, I wanted to try to break it down into the pieces and reconstruct it a bit, because I do think that sometimes we've lost it in all the incense and the candles. What I mean is the ritualistic way of seeing grace. And ritual doesn't have to be incense and candles. It can also be social constructions of how we've learned to talk about it. But beneath those layers lies kind of the full thing that's more glorious than what I think we make it. Jonathan Edwards said, grace is but glory begun, and glory is grace completed. And so there's something unbelievably dynamic and beautiful about grace. So I wanted to try and bring that to the surface. But with regard to really tackling how we tend to make things one-dimensional or one note and take and remove it from the sense of time, and in doing so, it becomes very transactional. Salvation becomes very transactional rather than relational or extended through time. That's been a frustration I've had for a very long time, and a lot of that, I think, is tied to revivalism in America. So there's wonderful things that happen through the ministry of D.L. Moody's and the Billy Sundays and the Billy Grahams. But I do think there's to that extreme, there's another side to it that I think is can be damaging if we don't balance that out, right? Ben Franklin said a lie is standing on one leg, a truth is standing on two, and there's something solid about having balance, okay? And revivalism just turns salvation into a thing that we control and makes it very proactive in terms of that transaction. In real short, what Ian Murray would argue, who's a historian that's done a lot of work on this, he would argue that before Charles Finney and the beginning of revivalism, that revival was always something that happened out of the blue. It was an act of God. The Holy Spirit would come, and it would be trans-denominational, like like the first Great Awakening, the second Great Awakening. It would just happen. It would last a decade, and you would see the fruit of it kind of everywhere. And we were playing catch-up in some ways to what the Holy Spirit was doing. And what Ian Murray would argue is that what happened with Charles Finney and his lectures on revival was that he turned it into something that we can control. Meaning, if we dim the lights, if we play the right music and we sing just enough verses of Just As I Am and invite people to come down to receive, meaning to get the benefit of that transaction, that we can control the revival. So if you drive through the countryside of Virginia, like I used to do going to college, you'll see little churches with signs that'll say revival this Friday night. Now, what would be argued is that the Puritans or others in the 1600s or 1700s would have seen that as a very arrogant claim. What do you mean revival this Friday night? How do you know? Right? Because they would have always, again, seen it as the Holy Spirit blowing in, creating revival. And so to say, hey, we're going to plan at 6 o'clock this Friday night, revival, it's going to happen, it's on. That they would see that as taking a very human-centered way of saying that we can control the levers and the mechanisms of revival and salvation. That's why I made the little tongue-in-cheek remark about the salvation industrial complex. And so there's a bit of that. Now, I don't want to go to the extreme of throwing all the baby out with the bathwater kind of thing, right? My father came to faith at a Billy Graham crusade, okay? But it has to be fair game for us to look at it and say, what are the unwanted outcomes of the revival tradition in America, and how do we then correct those? So that's kind of always been there as a tension for me of wanting to try and lean into some of those things and feeling like we need to lean into some of those things so that we don't create a culture where at youth camps the same kid comes to the front and accepts Jesus every single year, and you begin to wonder, what are we really doing? Right? You know what I mean by every year the same kid in the youth group, and it's like, I remember you. So yeah, that's a little bit of kind of why we went into it today. Thanks for the question. We can follow that up or go a new direction.